Right, let's discuss this development further now. We're joined by analyst Khaya Sithole. He joins us virtually. Khaya, thank you very much for your time. After about 5 years of this back and forth and people delaying this finally happening, at least South Africans will see that money come back to Eskom.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers. Yeah, I do think that obviously a sense of finality in relation to these matters is to be welcomed. It has been a very protracted process that a lot of people feel just bolsters the idea that many people that have means are able to delay justice for as long as possible. So I think obviously when we then see these matters being finalized and state resources being restored, it is always something to be welcomed.
Can you imagine, where is he going to get this money? I mean, 31.5 million rand since around 2017-18. By now, it's been spent.
Well, we do not know what the private conduct of his financial affairs is, but obviously you would hope that he still has access to particular resources that would enable him to pay back this amount of money. It is, of course, a bit of a complicated matter in that you do know that he spent a lot of time at the PIC and then at Transnet and then a bit of time at Eskom. So his pension accumulations over those years would not have been minor. So it's simply a question of how well he has managed his personal affairs over the past 5 years since this matter has been going on. That would then indicate how far he can go towards honoring this requirement.
But of course, he's not the only one that decided to resign in the wake of the corruption that was being uncovered at Eskom. So this is going to be something that is done, against quite a lot of people.
We hope so. And remember, his resignation was something that is still debatable because we do know that in the aftermath of the release of the state capture report by Professor Thuli Madonsela, there was the first exit, and then that seemed to have been then withdrawn and rejected, and then there was a second one. So it hasn't been an easy explanation or an easy journey towards getting us here, but I do think that probably Eskom and many people will welcome the finalization of this matter because it has dragged on a bit too long, and it's obviously been a bit of a governance distraction for the multiple boards that we've had, and Lord knows they do need to focus on more pressing challenges.
Exactly. But what does this say to you, Khaya? Does it say to you that, as South Africans, we should stop being despondent? Something is finally happening in terms of, us seeing the issues of corruption that happened, especially at Eskom, being sorted out and, agencies and courts actually finally working? Does it say that to you?
No, we definitely do. We are entitled to a sense of urgency in relation to the resolution of these matters because remember, for as long as these matters remain pending, these resources, which would otherwise be directed towards critical services, then remain in limbo. They cannot be accessed by either the fiscus or any other agency or organ of state. So it's only after the matters have been finalized that we then know what can be done to redirect those resources. So the sense of urgency is something that we should always demand. And in fact, we should be very critical of the fact that these matters take so long when clearly there are a lot of public resources at stake that need to be recovered with a greater sense of urgency. If you think, for example, remember one of the particulars of claim that was actually lodged against Eskom executives and former board members involved the late Dr. Ben Ngubane, who of course now is no longer in a position to even defend that case, and that case has not been finalized. So it's not ideal for these things to linger on.
And of course, I mean, I can imagine what Brian Molefe is probably saying right now. He's probably saying that he's being targeted because not so long ago, we for the first time saw him walk in court with Anur Singh for the same issues of corruption. And now, the enforcement of the court order and the confirmation that he should actually pay back the money. He obviously is going to be one of those people who say they targeted, right?
Look, it's well within his rights to formulate an opinion or a view on why these things are suddenly happening. But the reality here is that the litmus test and the forum where he has to then be able to put together a case, that supports that is within the court of law. So it is in everybody's interest for him to be able to either put that as a primary defense to say that he's being targeted or offer plausible explanations for all the charges that have been preferred against him, whether it's in the Transnet matters or even in these lingering Eskom matters.
And I mean, today we also heard from various organizations when it comes to even a Marcus Jooste. That's also a very old case involving the private sector. So I think you're quite right in terms of the fact that as South Africans, we're entitled to ask for urgency. And when you look at all these cases where there's been people arrested, whether the SIU was involved, etc., you wonder as a South African if that too is going to take 5-6 years.
Yeah, and it would be a tragedy if it took that long, because we do actually want to be able to really close the chapter on what has now turned out to be a very dark chapter in relation to how private and state actors really help themselves to resources, even in the private space and also in the public procurement space. We do want to be able to move on and start creating institutions that will be able to withstand some of these challenges should they ever emerge again in the future, because the one thing that one can always guarantees that there'll be someone in down the line who thinks they also stand a chance of being able to sort of get their way around some of the rules that have been written in some of the regulations and probably end up in a financially better off position. So we need to start focusing on building the state institutions and building private sector institutions to be able to detect and actually deal with these issues much earlier than what we've seen.
But this is also, Khaya, I don't know if you agree with me, this is also a very small fish in the pond, right? Although it was Brian Molefe, of course, he's somebody that many South Africans wanted to see, be taken to court and taken to task on his alleged involvement in the corruption that happened at Eskom. But we still have the Gupta brothers who are still out there doing business with who knows who, and, other government officials, people who are in government who still haven't been arrested. So this journey is going to be very long.
I wouldn't say it's a small fish in the pond, because at the end of it, Brian Molefe's personality and Brian Molefe's profile is an important one in relation to the issues that we're trying to resolve here. He was someone who had enormous authority, who had enormous power within the institutions that he ran, whether it was a Transnet or at Eskom. And of course, if we are going to create a culture within those institutions that everybody will eventually be caught, you do want to be able to see the big figureheads themselves being held accountable, because in the absence of that, it simply says to everyone else within the institution, you're probably going to get away with it, and that obviously entrenches a culture of corruption within those institutions, where you actually then want to see everybody having a fear of law enforcement, because it can catch anyone, including the biggest fish in the pond.
And what about the private sector? They were the enablers of the corruption that we saw, people bribing to get those tenders, etc. So it's even about getting the other big fish within that sector, the private sector.
It's been, again, a very slow process. So we know that Transnet finally got hold before the court, and obviously that's the beginning of what will be undoubtedly a remarkably long journey, where the resources that an organization like McKinsey, for example, has compared to what the state and the state capacity is, it's quite simply a mismatch. So we are hoping that organizations like Bain or like McKinsey are able to be held accountable. It's really going to boil down to a question of the capacity that we have within the state institutions to be able to put together winnable cases. And obviously, one has to hope that the reason these matters have taken so long is that the prosecution agencies have decided to go for the long methodical game that ensures that by the time they get to court, they're able to put together a winnable case, because the worst thing that could happen is for all these scoundrels to get away on the basis that we've got an incompetent prosecutions agency.
Yeah, absolutely. That would actually also add to our problems. Khaya, thank you so much for speaking to us on this issue. That is analyst Khaya Sithole speaking to us there about the development that Eskom can now go and get their money from the former CEO, Brian Molefe. That's about 31.5 million rand of his pension.